I've inspected this F. Kroeber clock movement on a previous video, so I'll get right to work on it. I'm bound to find some more defects while in the process of rebuilding each item. The movement is fairly complete. It's from about 1887, but in much need of restoration. It's been butchered, and I'm going to correct most all that's been done to it. This tension washer, it's supposed to hold the gear firmly against the ratchet wheel assembly, has fallen loose. Someone has damaged the brass shoulder with maybe a center punch. A new ratchet wheel will need to be fabricated. This support wire for the click is a piece of copper and will need to be replaced with a steel one. The ratchet wheel teeth are damaged. They've been deformed by hand filing on them. The second mainspring ratchet wheel and tension washer is in the same shape. It's going to need a new ratchet wheel fabricated as well. This click is going to need to be replaced or snugged up. I'll start on the center wheel. I see it's binding someplace. This bushing in the rear plate is starting to fall out. It's causing too much end shake. Maybe when someone pressed this pinion on the front, it pushed the bushing out. The bushing on the front plate is too thick. It should be flush with the plate. It's actually two bushings, and is sticking out on both sides of the plate. I see there's tool marks on this arbor. Maybe someone in the past has used wire cutters to remove the front pinion. Or possibly it was done intentionally to snug up the brass pinion. And I see the rear pivot has tool marks on it as well. Same type of wire cutter marks, 180 degrees apart from each other. Taking a closer look, they aren't on the actual working bearing surface, so this is a good thing. Well, I'll work on this front bushing first. The pivot fits up to it okay. It's sticking past the plate about 30 thousandths of an inch. I'll use this rough stone and hand work it down flush. The paper holds the stone away from the plate, about 1/1000th of an inch. It prevents the plate from getting scratched up. All honed smooth now. A small burr to remove. I'll use this broach to deburr it. The wheel fits fine with the correct amount of tilt. Now the rear plate bushing to deal with. I installed a new bushing, took special care to taper the outside diameter, and install it from the inside first. This will prevent it from being pushed out again if someone puts excess pressure on it from the front. Now need to make sure it spins free in all different directions. I see it does have a tight spot. I'll find where it's binding and relieve the hole a small amount. This third wheel bushing was too small. Someone center punched the plate to squish the brass around it. I'll make a new bushing for it. This pivot is too loose. Time for a new bushing in it. Well, I've replaced all the bushings that have needed it up to the escape wheel. They all work smoothly now. The escape wheel teeth have been deformed and will need some attention. The lantern pinion trundles have been tampered with on the escape wheel. Oh, they're loose. They should be swaged in. They could have worked themselves out and stripped a couple of gear teeth, being this loose. What a mess some people make. Looks like someone removed them and reversed them. The two shrouds have been pushed too close to each other. I'll rebuild it with new pins and adjust the shrouds away from each other a little. I see the old pins were worn out. The new pins made from piano wire are dropping in great. Now to swage the brass shroud around the holes to keep them from falling out. The escape wheel isn't running true. The teeth have been punched in different places in an attempt to adjust for worn or damaged teeth. I see the arms are bent too. I'll use this flat plate and do what I can to straighten it. Looking better. All of the teeth have been damaged. They should be square, and someone has rounded them over. Using this pin head, I'll index to the longest tooth. Rotating it, I can see that there's a bunch of teeth that are too short. What a mess. Either I'll need to fabricate a new wheel, or add material to each tip and handwork each one. I'll deal with this after I rebuild the pallet and fork. Someone has bent the rear plate, where the balance wheel pivots fit up to. Well, I've polished the pivots, and new bushings where needed in the second, third, fourth, and escape wheels. They rotate smoothly. No binding anyplace anymore. Now to fit the pallet and fork to the escape wheel. It's going to need a new arbor shaft fabricated. Someone really butchered this piece. The pallet and fork should move independent of each other. Not so now. Someone actually soldered them together. Solid. I desoldered them, and I'll see what I can do about salvaging them. Now to remove the excess solder from the ID of each piece. And this arbor, there's not a round surface left on it. I'll need to true this fork assembly up. The ID of the hole is most likely egg-shaped and butchered. Probably need to install a bushing in it after the new arbor is made. You can see tool marks next to the hole. Someone used a center punch and attempted to tighten it around the arbor. Looks like when that failed, they soldered it to the shaft. These old clocks have quite a story to tell of past abuse they suffered. Looks like someone used a chisel on the inside of it here. It's a wonder they didn't split it. I'll start on this pallet. First I'll clean the excess solder off, then smooth the tool marks down. It's never going to look like new again, but I can improve its appearance, and hopefully get it to function again. Rough stone first to remove the large imperfections. Then the glass plate to further smooth it. I'll need to size a shaft so I can lap the ID of the pallet and fork to a true round diameter. It's hardened steel. A carbide reamer would work, but no reamer is available for this small job. I'll use this fine lapping compound to lap the ID of the pallet and fork. It can be mixed with water or oil to form a slurry. I'll use oil for the mix. It's not going to take much. I've turned a piece of soft steel to the diameter I need on the lathe. One small drop, and I'll hand work the ID of the pallet so it's true again. Now for the fork. In the end, both fork ID and pallet ID need to be the same. Now it's time to fabricate a new arbor for them. The pre-made blued steel is slightly larger than what I need, so I'll need to hone it down to size. First a rough cut with a flat stone. Now a finer cut with some 220 carbide paper on a flat glass plate. I'll use the shaft I used to lap the pallet as my measuring standard for the new arbor. Putting a Marks-A-Lot ink on the shaft, then fitting the pallet to it, shows exactly where the pallet starts to seize on the shaft. I'll attempt to get the new arbor to within a half a thousandth of what is needed. I modified the new shaft, made the pivots longer. I think someone cut the original pivots shorter for some reason. I made both pivots match the escape wheel pivot length. The pallet fits great. Not too tight, but tight enough to hold it in place. Now to fit it to the plate. Checking the length against the escape wheel arbor, it's a good fit. I'll need to adjust the pallet on the arbor so the pallets hit the escape wheel teeth on center. I made a brass punch that clears the pivot and pushes against the shoulder of the arbor. This prevents damage in the pivot and the pivot shoulder. Now to check for proper engagement of the escape wheel teeth to the pallet. I'll put some hand pressure on the center wheel and cycle the escape wheel teeth through the pallets. So far, they are all hitting each pallet. It's coming together just fine. Now this back plate needs to be straightened so I can fit the balance. First, get this banking pin out of here that someone added for some reason. The cone bearing is a replacement. It was too short and someone bent the rear plate so it would reach the balance pivot. You can see tool marks on the plate where someone has pounded on the brass. I'll use a hammer and a heavy steel anvil to straighten it, but we'll use wood blocks between the plate and the hammer and anvil. This will avoid any tool marks. I see the fork fit is too loose. I'll need to install a bushing. and someone has bent it by putting a pair of pliers on it. I'll straighten this before I install the bushing. And the fork horns look deformed. I'll use this piece of scrap rod to make a flattening punch for the fork's center area. Nice, this will fit to flatten it without damaging the center mount. Much better. Now to ream the hole out at a right angle to the center mount. I countersunk the center mount on both sides and installed a bushing. It fits nice and snug. To ream the bushing to correct size, I fabricated a reamer that reamed the bushing to exact size needed for the arbor. And it now fits nice and snug, just snug enough to be able to adjust it when needed. Now to deal with the regulator and cone bearing someone butchered. These regulators should move independent of the cone bearing. Someone glued these together. Every time the regulator is moved, the cone bearing moves. I see this regulator is also bent. What a mess. Remove this cone bearing. I'd say it's the original. You can see a twist in the regulator. There's also a washer bonded to it. Looks like someone has filed this washer in the center. Looks like a mixture of JB Weld epoxy and clear superglue was used. I'll need to remove this gunk before I can start to rebuild it. Surprisingly, the brass parts are all gold gilt. I'll use a copper scraper so as to not damage the brass or the gold gilt on the parts. This washer doesn't fit the cone bearing the way it should. The cone bearing isn't finished smooth at this transition. It has several metal burrs on it from when the threads were cut, that cut into the washer. These cone bearings are hard as a rock. A file won't touch them. A grinding stone will, but they're too big and bulky. I fabricated a brass washer and will press it on the cone bearing. It will act as a thrust washer and will give a nice surface for the other washer to slide on. Much better. Now to cone shape the original washer to turn it into a compression washer. Regulator, compression washer, cone bearing. Straighten the regulator. Get the twist out of it. To remove the superglue from the plate, I'll use a copper scraper. This will prevent tool marks. The regulator, compression washer, cone bearing, now that's a nice fit. The regulator can be adjusted and the cone bearing stays put now. A fit check of the balance assembly. It's too short now that the back plate has been straightened. I'll select a cone bearing that's slightly longer. This one should work. I see someone has installed the hairspring backwards. To do this, they had to bend the hairspring at a 90-degree angle at the hairspring stud. I've never seen a movement so abused like this one. Someone bent this hairspring at a 90-degree angle while putting it in upside down. It's going to break when straightened. I'll remove the hairspring and inspect the balance wheel and staff. What a bent up mess. There's not parts available for a rare movement as old as this one. Well, the balance staff is bent big time. And a big tool mark on it here. It's going to need a new balance staff fabricated before I can move forward. First, I'll remove the old staff. I'll find some staff pivot wire and start cutting. As a comparison, I'll see how the old staff fits, and now the new staff. Oh, the new one spins so nice and smooth. Now to true the fork up. Take all the kinks and warped areas out of it. I need to locate the relief cut in the new staff. I'll use a diamond wheel to do the rough cut. Then true the cut up on a surface table at the same angle as the cut. And hand file it to the finished dimensions. The paper between the file and the surface table keeps it from cutting into the surface table. The new relief cut looks same as the original. Now to do a fit check to the fork. Ah, this should work just fine. Now to deal with the balance wheel. I made a shaft to fit the center hub to inspect and evaluate what needs to be done. I can see now the outer wheel is egg-shaped. Great. The center hub is spinning true, but the outer wheel is in bad shape. It's off on the horizontal and vertical planes both. Actually, the 3 arms look loose. I fabricated a punch to push the 3 arms in to snug them up. And now to take a closer look. Using this paper template will give a better visual of its condition. The outer wheel is definitely out of round. It looks like it's been smashed. Maybe someone dropped the movement and it took a hit on the balance wheel. It's about 20 thousandths out. That's too much. Using this jig, I'll be able to bring it back to where it should be. Now I'll remove the arms. This one has a burr on it that needs to be removed before it's pulled out of the wheel. Nice. Yep, the arms are bent. I fabricated some new ones from tool steel of the same diameter. I'll use a diamond wheel to trim them up. Now to polish them. The hub needs a bushing mounted in its center to match it to the new staff. With the new bushing mounted, now I can install the new arms. And now a fit check. Well, it's better than it was. Still needs to be trued slightly. I can do that by bending one of the arms just the right amount. Not perfect, but definitely acceptable. These new bearings and staff are fairly friction-free. It sure spins for a long time. Now to fit the impulse pin to the hub. Next is to deal with this messed up hairspring. It's too loose on the new staff. I can use this tapered punch to close the hole, and it'll fit nice and snug. A bunch of small hits and it will slowly close up to size. Now, what to do about the bent hairspring? The way someone had this mounted, the regulator would have never worked. The regulator pins were in the wrong area of the spring to work as intended. Well, I'll get to straightening on this and see where it takes me. It's got several twists in it. A modern hairspring wouldn't work on this movement. It's going to break in half here at the 90-degree angle bend. I'll need to do a splice repair on it. I ended up doing a 1/16 inch lap joint. Clamped it by wrapping it with some super thin bare copper wire, then a drop of acid flux, and a drop of soft, low melting point solder. Just need to smooth the joint out. The brake is in a fairly non-working part of the spring, so it won't affect the timing of the spring. Now the escape wheel teeth. Someone really worked these over. These punch marks are where someone attempted to make each tooth longer. It ends up weakening the wheel in the long run and warping it sometimes. I'll braze some silver brazing rod into the tips and hand work each of them. On the back of the lathe pulley is an index plate. It's divided into 60 equal parts. The escape wheel has 15 teeth. Since 60 divided by 15 equals 4, I can index one tooth to the surface plate at a time. This way I can hand mill each tooth to clean up the excess brazing material that was added to each tooth tip. Now to true the tips of the teeth and make them concentric to the center of the arbor, making sure the teeth are running true. Now to work down each tooth to correct thickness. The brazing material I used is Harris Safety Silv 56. It has close to the same tensile strength as the original clock brass used in these movements. Now to fit the balance spring to the stud and regulator pins. I have no history on the timekeeping of this movement. I'll mount the spring, then give it a trial run and go from there. When mounted, the spring needs to run free between the regulator pins, while at the same time having the collet centered on the balance cone bearing. This should work for a trial run. So it's been running for a week so far. I'm real happy with the escapement. The balance wheel is running nice and true. Pallet fork is engaging perfectly with the roller pin. And the escape wheel teeth, after being rebuilt, are giving plenty of power to the pallets. It's time to work on the case. Other than 2 missing grommets, the case is in great shape for being about 135 years old. The dial looks good. A little worn on the numbers from people setting the hands, but for its age it's great. A real nice F. Kroeber 2 mainspring barrel marine clock from about 1887.